Hey everybody, welcome back to day 3 of the Amonkhet limited set review on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and today we're going to go over the black cards in Amonkhet. Of course, there are the 3 quick disclaimers. This is a limited only set review. Don't get angry at me if I say your commander staple is an F. That's not what we're here for. Number 2, these of course are my first impressions of the format. They may change over time. These are how I'm going to approach the pre-release and the first couple of weeks of draft. And finally, these are my opinions. This is how I play the game. You may disagree, and that's fantastic. That is why I make these set reviews, to foster discussion. Chat with me, chat with each other in the comments down below. Don't just take my set review or anybody's set review as the gospel truth of card grades. Anyways, let's start off with a big one. Archfiend of Ifnir is 3 black for a creature demon at rare. It's a 5/4 flyer. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control, cycling for 2 generic mana. If you ever cycle this card, it is because you are basically about to die. This card is incredible, and this is one of the cards, if not the card I was talking about yesterday when I said, just wait, there's incredible cycling payoffs. -1/-1 counter on every creature your opponents control? That's incredible. Attached to a 5/4 flyer for 5. This guy looks absolutely amazing. The cycling is just a bonus for when you are desperately in trouble, but you should not be cycling this unless things are looking absolutely fatal for you. This is a pure bomb, snap first pick, and dive into the cycling deck. Solid A+ from me. Baleful Amonkhet is up next. Baleful Amonkhet is a 2 and a black creature crocodile demon. At uncommon, it's a 4/3, it has lifelink, and when Baleful Amonkhet enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature you control. You'll see this mechanic in black and in green. In green, it's a little bit overpowered because a lot of the creatures can take them off, which is annoying, but you'll see this where the creature can come in a little bit weaker and a little bit more appropriately costed, or you can throw the -1/-1 counter or counters on something else, maybe kill it off, or at least make it weaker, and have a full-powered, undercosted creature. So we can have a 3/2 lifelinker for 3, which is fine. You know, it's relatively normal. That's probably what I would cost it if that's what it said. Or we can get a 4/3 lifelinker for 3 if we throw a -1/-1 counter on our 2-drop, or a 1-drop, or on something else on our side of the battlefield. Yeah, this looks really good. All of these -1/-1 counter creatures look really, really, really good, and God, do I ever hope that this isn't just Aether Revolt over again with the +1/+1 counter deck, because these are real powerful. I've got this one at a B-, just because a 4/3 lifelinker for 3 is fine, but it does still die to a fair bit. And that, I think, is going to be the real release valve of this set, is there is significantly more good removal in this set than there was in Aether Revolt. So I think you can handle these things at least. But yeah, this is just really good. This is really good. It's going to be a 4/3 lifelinker for 3 some amount of the time. You might even get extra synergy out of it. There are creatures that want the -1/-1 counters, and even getting a 3/2 for 3 lifelink is fine filler. So I've got this at a B-, and I'll happily pick it. Blighted Bat is up next. Blighted Bat is 2 and a black for a creature zombie bat. It's a common, it's a 2/1 flyer, and you can pay 1 generic mana to give it haste until end of turn. This isn't really that great. It's a 3 mana 2/1 flyer, which is fine, but excruciatingly vulnerable. If any creature even looks at it, it just dies. Making it 4 mana to have it get haste seems really mediocre. It does give some late game value where you just have 4 mana and you're not going to do anything else with it, and maybe it allows you to get in for a surprise 2 damage, but it's not great. You know, you'll take this very late in the pack, and you'll play it when you have a spot, and you won't when you don't. So this is pure C to me. I'm not excited by it. I'm also not disgusted by it. So C for Blighted Bat. Bone Picker is up next, and holy, this card. 3 and a black for a creature bird at uncommon. It's a 3/2. Bone Picker costs 3 less to cast if a creature died this turn. And let me tell you, that happens. It happens a lot in Limited. It also has flying, it's bird, and it has Death Touch, because why not? A 3/2 flying Death Touch for 4, I'm playing that card 100% of the time. I'd play that card if that's all this card says. The fact that sometimes, and purposefully or not, and it's not going to be hard to make this purposeful, it's not going to be hard to do this by accident, this thing's going to cost 1. That is so good. This card seems amazing. Love it, love it, love it. Solid B. Easy high pick for me. Boy, some of the cards are pushed in this set. Thank you for the removal that we do seem to have, though. Time to take a look at the Black God, Bontu the Glorified. Bontu the Glorified is 2 and a black for a legendary creature god at Mythic. She's a 4/6. She has Menace and Indestructible. Bontu the Glorified can't attack or block unless a creature died under your control this turn. Pay 1 and a black, sacrifice another creature, scry 1. Each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. I really like Bontu. You obviously need to build properly for it. You'll want token producers, you'll want recursive creatures, embalm, things that get you value by sacrificing them. But the potential value here is incredible. Even if you're not attacking with her, you're getting a scry and a drain life. And if you are attacking with her as well, the game is very quickly going to be over. Bontu is possibly my favorite of the 5 gods. I think she slots into the controlling decks really well because you can actually just hold her back as an invincible blocker. You know, your opponents are going to attack in, sack something, drain them, scry, block with this creature and possibly eat it, or at least just, block it and nothing really happens. Bontu looks like she is just utterly full of value, and I desperately want to draft her. I've got her at an A-. I don't think she's she's not instantly game ending, so I'm not going to go higher than an A-. And she obviously requires setup and certain build around, but boy, I'm super excited to play her. A-, my favorite of the 5 gods. The Black Cartouche, Cartouche of Ambition, is 2 and a black for an enchantment or a cartouche at common. Enchant creature you control. When Cartouche of Ambition enters the battlefield, you may put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. This is another somewhat playable aura. A single -1/-1 counter isn't the greatest. There are some opponents who will even welcome it, and you might actually want to put it on one of your own creatures. We'll see some today where it's kind of good to have -1/-1 counters on them. I am, however, totally underwhelmed by the +1/+1 lifelink for 3 mana on this. Lifelink is fine, but auras that grant it generally aren't that great. Like, you really need the creature to still, successfully live a whole lot to get a whole lot of value out of it. So this really needs to go on a flyer, or that +1/+1 needs to go on an already gigantic creature or something like that. I'm not super sold on spending a full 3 mana on this card. Ultimately, I think I like this less than the blue one, which I think is going to come out just shy of on top. The green one's going to win hands down because it's ridiculous, but this is probably my third, kind of middle of the road of the cartouches. I'll play it here, I'll play it there, sometimes I won't. Middle of the road C for me. Cruel Reality is our next black mythic. Cruel Reality is 5 black for an enchantment or a curse at Mythic. Curse is, of course, enchant player. At the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. If the player can't, he or she loses 5 life. I don't know about Cruel Reality. 7 mana makes me very nervous. We talked about this yesterday with the mind control. It's tough to cast unless you super build towards it. If this format is slow, you've heard me say that a million times, I'm going to say that a million times more, then this card gets a bit better, but 7 mana is still just an awful lot to ask for. And I feel like if you are successfully controlling the game up to this point, you're probably winning anyways, making this card feel a little bit win-more-ish. And I feel like you should just play other stuff that will be, beneficial in other quadrants of the game as well as the final quadrant, and just, be a little bit less risky with this card. Not having cycling really significantly hurts this card because there's going to be times where you just don't get to this mana and this card is just utterly dead. So I'm going to start kind of low on this at a C-. Yes, the effect is incredibly powerful. It's going to attrition your opponent out and eventually just murder them 5 damage a time. But that 7 mana makes me a little bit hesitant. I'm going to start at C-. If the format does go glacially slow, this is obviously going to skyrocket up. Cursed Minotaur is up next. Cursed Minotaur is 2 and a black for a creature zombie Minotaur at common. It's a 3/2 with Menace. And that's about all that's going on there. I like a 3/2 for Menace way more than a 2/3 for Menace for 3, which is what we saw with Alley Strangler in Aether Revolt, or was that in Kaladesh? I don't remember which one it was in. It was in the last block. This is still not going to be a high pick or anything, but it's going to be an instant include in basically, most black decks, especially if they're being in any way aggressive. It's a straight up C+ for me. Totally fine with it. Let's move on to a card that I'm not totally fine with. Dispossess. Dispossess, which looks like it has too many S's in it every time I look at it. 2 and a black for a sorcery at rare. unfortunately. Choose an artifact card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the chosen name and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. You don't play cards like this. We didn't play Gideon's Intervention that we talked about last set. We're not going to play the almost similar card that we're going to see later in black. These cards, these slaughter game types cards, are not playable in limited, period. They're especially not playable when they only hit a certain narrow type of card like Artifact. This is going to be the rare that you're going to hate to open in a limited perspective because it's going to be 100% garbage. It is an F- in limited, no questions about it. Doomed Dissenter is up next. Doomed Dissenter is 1 and a black for a creature human at common. It's a 1/1. When Doomed Dissenter dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. This is fine. It obviously goes significantly up if you have a reason to play it. You're in the zombie deck and you want a zombie. You need a Bantu sacrifice target. You want something to throw your -1/-1 counters on because you're in black-green, etc. So it is a totally fine include if you're in one of those decks. I just don't think that it goes into every single black deck. 1/1 for 2 is pretty darn awful, and getting there, meaning that you chump block and get a 2/2 token, just isn't worthwhile if you're not synergizing with it. In a vacuum, I cut this with regularity, but in a deck that has a way of taking advantage of it, using it to milk out some value, it goes up for sure. I'm going to give it a C+, just kind of on the pick order level, because you're not taking this with hopes of getting into one of those decks. You're taking this real late when you're already in one of them. So C-, but you know when you want this. And that's honestly a lot of cards in this set. I don't want to get too sidetracked. A lot of people often ask, why do I bother with this? Obviously, cards are good in decks that they're good in, and they're not good in other decks. But rating cards in a vacuum is a very important skill to have in Limited, and that is what I try to approach with. But unfortunately, when you do get to sets that have super heavy synergy, which this one does for several decks, it does get a little bit hard to grade. But I'm not going to get too sidetracked into that. Up next is Dread Wanderer. Dread Wanderer is a single black mana for a creature zombie jackal at rare. Dread Wanderer enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 2 and a black. Did I say it's a 2/1? It's a 2/1, by the way. Pay 2 and a black, return Dread Wanderer from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery, and only if you have 1 or fewer cards in hand. This around the internets is being called Heckbent, because it's 1 away from being Hellbent. Yeah. This card's fine. This card is similar to Gravecrawler, but significantly worse than Gravecrawler, which was a single black mana for a 2/1. It entered the battlefield tapped, and you could cast it from your graveyard for a single black mana, of course. You're just casting it with its normal casting cost if you had a zombie, which you generally did in Innistrad or Dark Ascension when it was printed. This is a fine regressive creature, but the recursion doesn't do too much for me outside of synergistic payoffs. A 2/1 coming back for 3 mana on a very late turn when you have 1 or fewer cards in hand just isn't that great. It might provide a little bit of reach that you need, or maybe it just becomes a recursive sacrifice target for Bantu or something like that. So that's definitely there, but it's not anywhere near Gravecrawler for me, which I thought was a great card. It was like a solid B-. This, totally fine aggro, but I'm not going to first pick it ever, I don't think. C+ for me. Dune Beetle is up next. Dune Beetle is 1 and a black for a creature insect at common. It's a 1/4, and that's all it is. It's a vanilla 1/4 for 2. Like Ancient Crab, this is used pretty specifically in a deck that desperately needs to go late, and even then I probably wouldn't main deck it. I would just pull it in if, I'm up against a super aggro deck. Yeah, keep this far away from any deck that isn't struggling to get to the late game, and even then I think you still only sideboard it in, so I'm going to go with a D+ on it. Faith of the Devoted is up next. Faith of the Devoted is 2 and a black for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This is another of the black Cycling Matters payoff cards that I really, really like. I was ever so slightly down on Drakehaven for having to pay an extra mana. I still think it's fine, but I was slightly down on it. This one, you also have to pay 1 mana, but you get a 4-point life swing. You deal 2 damage and gain 2 life. It's only going to take a couple activations of this before you get significant value and you get significantly ahead. A couple activations of Drakehaven, if your opponent has any sort of creature interaction or flyer interaction, isn't going to do much. But this is going to quickly change the course of a game. And if you are heavily in the cycling deck and activating this several times, you're just going to win the game. I really, really like Faith of the Devoted. It's one of my favorite cycling payoffs, with, of course, Archfiend being way up at the top. Yeah, I've got this at a B. Obviously, you need to be in the cycling deck. If you don't have more than a couple cycling cards, you don't touch this card. But I'm really excited by this. Solid B for me. Festering Mummy is up next. Festering Mummy is a single black mana for a creature zombie at common. It's a 1/1. When Festering Mummy dies, you may put up -1/-1 counter on target creature. This is basically an upgrade of Shambling Goblin, which was exactly this, except it was a zombie goblin, and it was a -1/-1 until end of turn effect. This is obviously much better because it's a counter. If it doesn't straight up kill the creature, it's going to weaken them for the rest of the game until they somehow get it off. Now, of course, the downside is some decks, they're going to be kind of happy getting a -1/-1 counter. But if you build your deck properly, you're going to be able to benefit from having a -1/-1 counter being placed somewhere as well, as we'll see, especially in green and black-green specifically. Totally playable, just not very exciting. Pick it up when the cards start drying out. Play it when you have the spots. Don't go out of your way for it. Solid C. Final Reward is up next. Final Reward is 4 and a black for an instant. At common, exile target creature. Period. This is yet another of these pieces of removal that are instant speed, and, you know, some of them are slightly expensive. This one at 4 and a black is a bit expensive, but it's a 5 mana instant speed, splashable, unconditional removal that exiles ruining, embalming, and recursion plans. Totally sign me up. Being 5 mana is slightly worse than, being immediately first pickable, but I'd still consider it first pick in a number of packs for sure, I'm certain. Seems like it's just a very solid card. I'll happily grab the first one very highly, probably even the second one too. I'll splash it, straight up B. I love unconditional instant speed removal. We've got a reprint here with Gravedigger. Gravedigger is 3 and a black for a creature zombie at uncommon. It's a 2/2. When Gravedigger enters the battlefield, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. As we talked about yesterday, I don't like this effect when it's a card doing this, but when it's a creature or when there's something more going on for it, it's usually pretty decent. And Gravedigger has always been great in the formats that it's been in. 4 mana for a 2/2 plus getting another creature back, maybe even a really good one. Totally fine. It's been solid in all the core sets it's been in. I can't remember the last time we saw it. Maybe M15, M14, somewhere around there. Anyways, it's probably not a first pick even in this set, but still relatively high and should always be run in your black decks. So B- for Gravedigger. Grim Strider is up next. Grim Strider is 3 and a black. It's a creature horror uncommon 6/6 that appears to be made of nightmares because it's terrifying looking. Grim Strider gets -1/-1 for each card in your hand. I'm really going to have to play with this one to figure it out, I think. Realistically, I just don't think this is a 6/6 early enough to be relevant. I think by the time you get this to be a 6/6 generally, it's going to be the point of time where it's just, keyword big, as they say on Limited Resources. It's big. It's fine, but, removal kills it off and you can double block it, and it's just not great by the time it's going to be a 6/6. Still, if this is a 4/4, early enough on turn 4, then it's going to be fine, I think. It passes the vanilla test at that point. I'll keep an eye on this one. Due to the variability, I'm going to start it a little bit low at a C+. Some abilities would be nice, First Strike, Menace, Trample, something like that. But yeah, I'm going to have to keep an eye on it. Going to have to see how frequently you can, kind of get your hand empty early enough for this to be, more than just a big dumb creature. So C+ to start. Horror of the Broken Lands similarly looks like utter nightmares. 4 and a black for a creature horror at common. It's a 4/4. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, Horror of the Broken Lands gets +2/+1 until end of turn, and you can cycle it for a single black mana. Now, +2/+1 sounds a lot better to me than the blue +1/+1 cycling payoff, the Heckma Sentinels. I'm still leaning towards the cycling payoff deck being a very controlling one, and not one that's attacking with, a bunch of Heckma Sentinels and stuff like that. And a 4/4 that attacks as a 6/5, or maybe an 8/6 in some, multiple cycling per turn decks, is a pretty solid finisher, especially if you give it flying with the bird that gives flying on cycling. Without more than a few cycling cards, though, this is just a mediocre 4/4 for 5 with cycling tacked on, which I wouldn't always play. But, in the cycling deck, this is going to play a very solid role. I'm going to put it at a C+, kind of for the cycling deck, maybe even a B-. In the wrong decks, this is very cuttable at a C-. Lay Bare the Heart is up next. 1 and a black for a sorcery at uncommon. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-legendary, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. I don't like playing Thoughtseize effects in Limited. They're just not that great. People frequently try to argue with me that this is removal. You play it, and then you take the bomb out of their hand, and you killed their bomb. But that doesn't happen all the time. That happens rarely. That happens a fraction of the time. There's a large number of times where you're going to look at their hand and you're going to waste a card on getting rid of a bear. Or you're going to waste a card on getting rid of nothing. They have nothing but lands in their hand. Then what do you do? I don't play these effects in Limited unless they have something really good attached to them. Harsh Scrutiny was kind of as close as I got because it had a scry attached to it. But even then I didn't play it much. I don't play these. I don't think that anybody should. D- for me for Lay Bare the Heart. Liliana, Death's Majesty, is an A+. Moving on. No, let's actually talk about her. Liliana, Death's Majesty, is 3 black for a Planeswalker Liliana at Mythic. She's a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, passes the Planeswalker vanilla test. +1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. -3, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. -7, destroy all non-zombie creatures. Liliana seems incredible. She establishes a board presence with her +1, and she mills yourself, which is great. Getting any creature back from your graveyard for -3, it doesn't matter if it's a 2-drop or a 12-drop, -3 gets it back to the battlefield. Could easily cheat out some really ridiculous bombs. Finally, clearing the board except for probably a significant number of your creatures if you're in black and if you're returning them with Liliana, etc., is incredible. Double black and 5 mana are the only strikes here, and they're not big enough strikes to knock her from an A+ for me. Liliana seems utterly amazing. Boy, I hope I open her and play with her because she looks incredible. A+, easy. Liliana's Mastery is up next. Liliana's Mastery is 3 black for an enchantment at rare. Zombies you control get +1/+1. When Liliana's Mastery enters the battlefield, create 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. It's a zombie anthem. Did I say there's a zombie deck in this format? There's a zombie deck in this format. You should draft it. Yeah. The zombies deck looks really fun, but as I've said, there's so many hooks for it that I just get really worried that everybody at the table is going to think that they're in it and try to draft it. And so I think the winning strategy, at least for a little bit of time, is going to be avoid the zombie deck. And I'm not just saying that because I want you to so that I can draft it, although that's a bonus. Zombies are obviously a deck in this format and a zombie anthem. And as we'll see in the next card, a second zombie anthem in the form of a lord is just a huge payoff for this. There's no chance that I'm not taking this every time I see it and just really trying to go deep on it. But boy, do I worry that that's going to be near on impossible. However, at worst, this is 2 3/3s for 5, which is totally fine. It's 6/6 for 5. That beats the vanilla test. That's totally fine right there. Obviously, you want to build around it for this to be incredible, but it's fine on its own, which is nice. Boy, I hope that I'm wrong and the zombie deck doesn't get overdrafted, but we'll see. I'm going to go with a B+ on it, assuming that you are in zombies.deck. As I just mentioned, Lord of the Accursed is up next. Lord of the Accursed is 2 and a black for a creature zombie at uncommon. Other zombies you control get +1/+1. It's a 2/3. Pay 1 and a black, tap it. All zombies gain menace until end of turn. Kind of interesting here. Your opponent's zombies get menace. It doesn't really matter unless you're giving them menace on their turn, which would be dumb, but interesting little symmetric effect, which they typically don't do anymore, but it's never really gonna matter. Anyways, this is a zombie lord, immediately following a zombie anthem. 2/3s for 3, of course, aren't anything more than filler, so if you're not zombie-y enough, you should probably cut this if you have anything better. But in the zombies deck, this is just another solid include. Buffing your zombies, potentially making blocking a nightmare for your opponent is just real nice. Not getting to attack as well, if you do want to give menace, is a slight problem, but in a properly built deck, it just shouldn't be a big problem at all. B-, assuming zombie.deck. More zombies with Miasmic Mummy. Miasmic Mummy is 1 and a black for a creature zombie jackal at common. It's a 2/2. When Miasmic Mummy enters the battlefield, each player discards a card. It's a 2/2 for 2 with a quote-unquote downside? Except obviously not really a downside. You're going to discard a card that either A, you really don't care about, or B, that you can embalm or recur or etc., 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 etc. Now, of course, unfortunately, your opponent in this graveyard interaction format is also probably going to do that. So it's kind of just like a neutral thing often at best. Maybe you get some value, but your opponent's just as likely to get some value out of it as well. But as it is, it's a 2/2 for 2 with maybe some upside. I'll give it an honorary C+, although it is a weak C+ at that. Nest of Scarabs is up next. Nest of Scarabs is 2 and a black for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you put one or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, create that many 1/1 black insect creature tokens. Now, it doesn't matter if it's your creatures or opponent's creatures. Anytime you put them anywhere on the board, you get yourself that many 1/1 insects. I'm not super sold on this effect. Obviously, the -1/-1 counters deck is a thing. And getting some 1/1s out of it is probably worthwhile, but you're going to need some critical mass of -1/-1 cards. I don't think it's okay to have a Baleful Amonkhet and a Cartouche of Ambition and play this card. I think you really need to be the black-green -1/-1 counters deck to play this card. And if you do, great, because suddenly you're going to have a whole lot of 1/1s that you really don't give a damn about that you can throw -1/-1 counters on and get more 1/1s and not have them be on your big creature. So I think in the right deck, and man, I'm saying that a lot with cards in this set, which slightly worries me for sealed. It might mean that it's too high synergy in sealed to really work well. I kind of found that in Kaladesh a little bit and Shadows over Innistrad, but in draft, it should make the draft very interesting. Anyways, in the right deck, I think this is kind of like a B-, maybe even a B, and in the wrong deck, you're just not touching this. So B- / I don't know, F? Painful Lesson is up next. 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. This is Sign in Blood, which is exactly this card, except it costs black instead of 2 and a black. Sign in Blood was always pretty darn decent. It was 2 mana. It drawed you cards. It drew you cards. It drew you cards early in the game where 2 life really wasn't that big of a cost, and it targeted player, which means it was a black shock. Never, ever, ever forget that you can end games with this card. Now, it's slightly more expensive than Sign in Blood, but it's also slightly easier to cast, and that's fine by me. I'm really hoping that Amonkhet is friendly to this card, just like I'm hoping it is to Hieroglyphic Illuminations. I'm going to go with a C+ on it. Really like it, and that added reach of being able to hit your opponent is solid. Pitiless Vizier is up next. Pitiless Vizier is 3 and a black for a creature Minotaur Cleric at common. It's a 4/2. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, Pitiless Vizier gains indestructible until end of turn. So this is another cycling payoff card, and it's one that I think is fine. You know, a 4/2 indestructible attacking in is going to eat a creature or deal 4 damage, both of which are pretty nice. Still, it's exceedingly weak when it's not turned on. So I'm not super sold on this being the best plan. You know, the 4/4 horror is always a 4/4. It's going to take some work to kill that off. A 4/2 dies to Magma Spray. It dies to a pair of -1/-1 counters. It dies to an awful lot of things. And so I'm not as sold on this being an amazing cycling payoff, but I'd still play it if I was in the cycling deck at kind of a C level. I'd take it or leave it. If, of course, you're not in cycling, this is just a 4/2 for 4, which is pretty garbage and more like a D+. Plague Belcher is up next. Plague Belcher is 2 and a black for a creature zombie beast at rare. It's a 5/4 menace for 3. When Plague Belcher enters the battlefield, put 2 -1/-1 counters on target creature you control. Whenever another zombie you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. This looks absolutely fantastic, and it has the potential of being an absolute beating if it comes down on turn 3 and you throw those counters somewhere else, giving you a 5/4 menace on turn 3. That is almost guaranteed to attack in on turn 4 for 5. That is going to happen with some reliability. Adding synergy to the zombie deck is just icing on the cake. The worst case scenario of getting a 3/2 menace for 3 isn't even that bad of a floor. This seems like a solid first pick to me that just needs a slight bit of building to be great. I'm going to go with a B+ on it. Ruthless Sniper is up next. Ruthless Sniper is a single black mana for a creature human archer at uncommon. It's a 1/2. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. This also seems like a nice include for the sort of controlling cycling deck. +1/+1, indestructible? No. Give me the ability to target -1/-1 counters, especially with the black cards that care about them being put on. This with Nest of Scarabs? Awesome. It's like a cycling -1/-1 counter hybrid deck, which is probably just going to be too janky to actually go off. But yeah, this, it arguably leads more into the black-green deck than it does the blue-black deck, but I like this, and in the cycling deck, I would go with a B- on it. Obviously, significantly worse if you're not in that deck. Scarab Feast is next, a single black mana for an instant at common. Exile up to 3 target cards from a single graveyard. Cycling for a single black mana. I don't super care for this one. It's one of those cards where the effect, I really don't care. It has cycling, and that doesn't make me care anymore because this takes up a card slot. Yes, we are in a Graveyard Matters format, but using an entire card to get rid of a few Embalm creatures or Aftermath cards just isn't something that I want to be playing. So I'm going to start not main decking this card ever. I'm going to keep it in the sideboard at a D+. That being said, this is one of the ones that I could see playing because 1 out of, preferably like 5 games, this does something really good. But if it's any less than that, I just don't see main decking this. So I'm going to start this at a D+. Keep an eye on it, but I'm on D+ for it. Shadow of the Grave is 1 and a black for an instant at rare. Return to your hand all cards in your graveyard, but there's more, that you cycled or discarded this turn. You're not going off on this. I'm going to take a hard pass on this. I just feel like it's way too Magical Christmas Landy to think that you're going to be getting back more than 1 or 2 cards with this. This is for the realm of Constructed and Commander, I think, where you can really fine-tune your deck. I'll keep an eye on it. Maybe there's some sweet black-red cycle discard deck, but I doubt it in Limited, so I'm going to go with a D- on it. Soul Stinger is next. Soul Stinger is 3 and a black for a creature Scorpion Demon. All kinds of animal demons here. For a common 4/5. When Soul Stinger enters the battlefield, put 2 -1/-1 counters on target creatures you control. Not creatures. When Soul Stinger dies, you may put a -1/-1 counter on target creature for each -1/-1 counter on Soul Stinger. So Soul Stinger is kind of cool. It's one of the few of these cards where you really want the -1/-1 counters to go on it. A 2/3 for 4 is all right if it doles out a pair of -1/-1 counters on death. Getting a 4/5 at the expense of another creature, not that insane. I think you'll almost always just put the counters on this, and that'll be totally fine. I think this is a straight up C+. I think it's fine. It's not amazing, but you'll probably play it every time. Splendid Agony is 2 and a black for an instant at common. Distribute 2 -1/-1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. Yours, your opponent's, wherever you see fit. This just seems pretty solid to me. I was always totally fine with Cruel Finality, which was 3 mana for a -2/-2 and a scry, despite people hating it. And the fact that this is counters, it could potentially take out 2 creatures, and it may even have some minimal synergy casting it on your own creatures, or at least making insects or snakes or something like that, makes me really happy with this. It's not a first pick by any stretch of the imagination, and obviously it's on the weaker end of removal, but at instant speed, I'm perfectly happy to play any of these that I pick up in the middle of the pack. C+. Stir the Sands is next. It's 4 black for a sorcery at uncommon. Create 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Cycling for 3 and a black. That's a very expensive cycling cost. When you cycle Stir the Sands, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So I'm not too psyched about getting 3 2/2s for 6. Zombies.deck notwithstanding, but it's not the worst card ever. It's fine. It's like playing a 6/6 for 6, which is something that some decks are okay with. Now, being able to cycle it, potentially at instant speed, to get a card and a 2/2 is fine. It's basically a nimble innovator with flash, which makes it a playable, fine card. All in all, this is one of the well-designed cycling cards I like. If I draw this late enough, or if I just never really need the card in the 2/2, I get myself 3 2/2 zombies on turn 6 or later. And if I am desperate for a land, or if I feel the need to flash in a 2/2 blocker or whatever, I have that option too. I really like both halves of this card. I think it's totally fine. I've got it at C+. I'm not going to go that much higher. I think you always play it, but I don't think you go out of your way to pick it up. Supernatural Stamina is up next. Supernatural Stamina is a single black mana for an instant at common. Until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, because that's easier than saying regenerate. Or at least it is for newer players, because regenerate is a very loaded word with a whole lot of rules text behind it. Yeah, this is a fine combat trick. You know, it's going to save your creature and hopefully kill the other one for a single mana. And single mana combat tricks are always kind of the best ones, because you don't have to do any work, and you're not really telegraphing it usually by leaving up a mana. It's not an auto-include, definitely. You definitely cut this if you have better stuff, if you have removal, etc. But it's just kind of a middle-of-the-road C, maybe just a C-. It's an average combat trick. Trespasser's Curse is another curse in this set. 1 and a black for an enchantment or a curse at common. Enchant player. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, that player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is way too slow, and it's just not worth a card slot in your deck. I'll lose to it, hands down I'll lose to it, but I just don't think it should ever be played, even in multiples. I'm at a D- on this. We've seen similar curses to this in the past, and they've just been way too slow. Yeah, you can give it a try if you want, but my recommendation is you don't. D-. The Black Trial is the Trial of Ambition. Trial of Ambition is 1 and a black for an enchantment at uncommon. When Trial of Ambition enters the battlefield, target opponent sacrifices a creature. When a cartouche enters the battlefield under your control, return Trial of Ambition to its owner's hand. Yeah, this is a sorcery speed edict. And calm down, edict effects aren't that great. At 2 mana, they're okay, but this is not premium removal in any way, shape, or form. If you can recur it a couple of times, it might be decent, but I definitely feel like a cartouche deck is a trap. I don't think you want to be playing a ton of them. Playing a bunch of auras sounds just awful, because you're cutting into your real spells and your real creatures at that point. Ultimately, this is probably just going to be a 1, maybe 2-time use edict, which is about a C+ in my books. Your opponent's going to choose the worst creature, so you want to use this generally pretty early, so C+, not amazing, but fine. Unburden is 1 black for a sorcery at common. Target player discards 2 cards, cycling 2 generic mana. It's a Mind Rot with cycling, which is still just a Mind Rot. This is one of those cycling cards where I've seen people say, oh man, I don't usually play a Mind Rot, but it has cycling on it. I'm playing this 100% of the time. I don't agree with that. I still don't think you're going to be mind rotting your opponent all that much. You're just going to be playing this as 2 mana draw a card, in which case I'd prefer, if it's possible, obviously in sealed, you might not have the possibility, but I prefer to play a real card. But yeah, this one's close, because mind rot is close to playable. It's more playable in sealed than in draft, but in this set, I think it is significantly worse, given that your opponent's going to probably discard embalm creatures, aftermath spells, things to recur, etc. So I'm probably just off on Burden. I've got it at C-. I think I'm going to cut it pretty regularly. Realistically, I think I'm just never going to play it. Wander in Death is up next. It's 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, cycling for 2 generic mana. It's another of those effects where I don't like using a card for this effect. Having cycling on it means that I'm slightly more likely to play this, but still keeping it a C-. I'm going to cut it pretty regularly. I just don't care about this, especially in a format where we have all kinds of abilities and creatures and etc. that are going to get us stuff back anyways. I just don't see Wander in Death being something I play. So C-, gonna cut it pretty aggressively. Wasteland Scorpion is our final non-split black card. Wasteland Scorpion is 2 and a black for a creature scorpion at common. It's a 2/2 with Death Touch and cycling for 2. This card I love. This is totally fine. I'm not sure I'd ever cycle it. I'm pretty sure that's there for no reason. A 2/2 Death Touch is basically always relevant on turn 3, on turn 12. It's generally gonna do something real good for you. The only place it wouldn't be good is if you're facing down mono flyers or something. It's a totally fine C. I won't go up to C+ just because I do prefer my Death Touch creatures to be a little bit cheaper or bigger or have first strike or something. 3 mana is a little bit much. You know, the 2/2 isn't really going to make this any better than a 1/1, so I'm sticking at C, but it's totally fine, and I can't see myself ever really cycling it ever. Our split card for black is Never to Return. Never is 1 black for a sorcery at rare. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Just kill them dead. Return is 3 and a black for a sorcery with Aftermath. Exile target card from a graveyard. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Yeah, this is great. It's unconditional 3 mana removal. That's an easy A- for me. The only reason it doesn't go up is because it's not instant speed, which I'm sure everybody has talked and complained about already. Snap first pick in basically every pack. The return isn't too exciting. I didn't exactly play Shambleback with regularity, and paying 4 times as much doesn't sound awesome, but it's a free card attached to a premium piece of removal. It doesn't matter. It could not be there, and this still would be an A-, just like Commit to Memory that we talked about. That being said, if I have the mana, I'm totally going to do it, whereas Memory, I don't know how regularly I'm going to cast that half, but yeah, this is totally great. It's an A-, easy first pick. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for day 3, the black set review. Tomorrow we're going to tackle red. Of course, let me know in the comments down below what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you think of black. Tell me about the cycling deck, because I'm still really unconfident in my ratings on the cycling deck and how I'm supposed to build it. I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at facebook.com/themanaleek, twitch.tv/themanaleek, and patreon.com/themanaleek if you want to become a backer there. As always, click that like button if you like the content. It really helps the discoverability of my content, helps grow the channel, make more content, etc. Click subscribe if you want to see more, and if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the red set review.